Recording, and then I'm just going to share the screen. Okay,
Okay.
so this is chapter 6. We can all see? All right. All right, Douglas, you ready? All right, let's do this. All right. John Dawson was a handsome man. In spite of his unshaven face, tousled hair, and rumpled shirt, there was something distinguished about him. He seemed to be in his 40s, a professional soldier, no doubt, with penetrating eyes, a resolute chin, thin lips, a broad forehead, and slender hands. When I pushed open the door, I found him lying on a camp bed, staring up at the ceiling. The bed was the only piece of furniture in the narrow white cell. Thanks to an ingenious system of ventilation we had installed, the windowless cell was less stuffy than the open room above. When he became aware of my presence, John Dawson showed neither surprise nor fear. He did not get up, but simply raised himself into a sitting position. He scrutinized me at length without saying a word, as if measuring the density of my silence. His stare enveloped my whole being, and I wondered if he saw that I was a mass of eyes. "What time is it?" he asked abruptly. In an uncertain voice, I answered that it was after 4. He frowned, as if in an effort to grasp the hidden meaning of my words. "When is sunrise?" he asked. "In an hour," I answered, and I added without knowing why, "approximately." We stared at each other for a long interval, and suddenly I realized that time was not moving at its normal, regular pace. In an hour, I shall kill him, I thought, and yet I didn't really believe it. This hour which separates me from murder will be longer than a lifetime. It will belong always to the distant future. It will never be one with the past. There was something age old in our situation. We were alone, not only in the cell, but in the world as well. He seated, I standing, the victim and the executioner. We were the first or the last men of creation. Certainly we were alone. And God, he was present somewhere. Perhaps he was incarnate in the liking with which John Dawson inspired me. The lack of hate between executioner and victim. Perhaps this is God. When we were alone in the narrow white cell, he sitting on the bed and I standing before him staring at each other. I wished I could see myself through his eyes. Perhaps he was wishing he could see himself through mine. I felt neither hate nor anger, nor pity. I liked him, that was all. I liked the way he scowled when he was thinking, the way that he looked down at his nails when he was trying to formulate his thoughts. Under other circumstances, he might have been my friend. "Are you the one?" he asked abruptly. How had he guessed it? Perhaps by a sense of smell. Death has an odor, and I brought it in with me. Or perhaps as soon as I came through the door, he had seen that I had neither arms nor legs nor shoulders, that I was all eyes. "Yes," I said. I felt quite calm. The step before the last is the hard one. The last step brings clear-headedness and assurance. "What is your name?" he asked. This question disturbed me. Is every condemned man bound to ask it? Why does he want to know the name of his executioner? In order to take it with him to the next world? For what purpose? Perhaps I shouldn't have told him, but I could refuse nothing to a man condemned to die. "Elisha," I said. "Very musical," he observed. "It's the name of a prophet," I explained. Elisha was a disciple of Elijah. He restored life to a little boy lying upon him and breathing into his mouth. "You're doing the opposite," he said with a smile. There was no trace of anger or hate in his voice. Probably he too felt clear-headed and assured. "How old are you?" he asked with aroused interest. 18, I told him, and for some reason I added nearly 19. He raised his head, and there was pity on his thin, suddenly sharpened face. He stared at me for several seconds, then sadly nodded his head. "I'm sorry for you," he said. I felt his pity go through me. I knew that it would permeate me completely, that the next day I should be sorry for myself. "Tell me a story," I said. "A funny one, if you can." I felt my body grow heavy. The next day it would be heavier still, I reflected. The next day it would be weighed down by my life and his death. "I'm the last man you'll see before you die," I went on. Try to make him laugh. Once more I was enveloped by his look of pity. I wondered if everyone condemned to die looked at the last man he saw in the same way, if every victim pitied his executioner. "I'm sorry for you," John Dawson repeated. By dint of an enormous effort, I managed to smile. "That's no funny story," I remarked. He smiled at me in return. Which of our two smiles was the sadder? "Are you sure it isn't funny?" No, I wasn't so sure. Perhaps there was something funny about it. The seated victim, the standing executioner, smiling and understanding each other better than if they were childhood friends. Such are the workings of time. The veneer of conventional attitudes was wiped off. Every word and look and gesture was naked truth instead of just one of its facets. Here was harmony between us. My smile to answer his pity was mine. No human being would ever understand me as he understood me at this hour. Yet, I knew that this was solely on account of the roles that were imposed upon us. This is what made it a funny story. Sit down, said John Dawson, making room for me to his left on the bed. I sat down. Only then did I realize that he was a whole head taller than I, and his legs were longer than mine, which did not even touch the ground. I have a son your age, he began, but he's not at all like you. He's fair-haired, strong, and healthy. He likes to eat, drink, go to the pictures, laugh, sing, and go out with the girls. He has none of your anxiety, your unhappiness. And he went on to tell me more about his son, who was studying at Cambridge. Every sentence was a tongue of flame which burned my body. With my right hand, I patted the revolver in my pocket. The revolver, too, was incandescent and burned my fingers. I mustn't listen to him, I told myself. He is my enemy, and the enemy has no story. I must think of something else. That's why I wanted to see him, in order to think of something else while he was talking. Something else, but what? Of Alana? Of Gad? Yes, I should think of Gad, who was thinking of David. I should think of our hero, David Ben Moshe, who... I shut my eyes to see David better, but to no purpose, because I had never met him. A name isn't enough, I thought. One must have a face, a voice, a body, and pin the name of David Ben Moshe upon them. Better think of a face, a voice, a body that I actually knew. Gad? No, it was difficult to imagine Gad as a man condemned to die. Condemned to die. That was it. Why hadn't I thought of it before? John Dawson was condemned to die. Why shouldn't I baptize him David Ben Moshe? For the next 5 minutes, you are David Ben Moshe in the raw, cold, white light of the death cell of the prison at Acre. There is a knock at the door, and the rabbi comes in to read the Psalms with you, and here you say the Vidui, that terrible confession in which you admit your responsibility not only for the sins you have committed, whether by word or deed or thought, but also for those you may have caused others to commit. The rabbi gives you the traditional blessing. The Lord bless you and keep you, and exhorts you to have no fear. You answer that you are unafraid, that if you had a chance, you would do the same thing all over. The rabbi smiles and said that everyone on the outside is proud of you. He's so deeply moved that he has to make a visible effort to hold back his tears. Finally, the effort is too much for him and he sobs out loud. But you, David, do not cry. You have tender feelings for the rabbi because he is the last man. The executioner and his assistants don't count. You will see before you die. Because he is sobbing, you try to comfort him. Don't cry, you say. I'm not afraid. You don't need to be sorry for me. I'm sorry for you, said John Dawson. You worry me, not my son. He put his feet down on the floor. He was so tall that when he stood up, he had to bend over in order not to bump his head against the ceiling. He put his hands in his pockets of his rumpled khaki trousers and began to pace up and down the cell. 5 steps in one direction, 5 in the other. I admit is funny, I observed. He did not seem to hear, but he went on pacing from wall to wall. I looked at my watch. It was 4:20. Suddenly, he stopped in front of me and asked for a cigarette. I had a package of players in my pocket and wanted to give them to him, but he refused to take the whole package, saying quite calmly that obviously he didn't have time to smoke them all. Then he said with sudden impatience, have you a pen and pencil? Oh, sorry, have you a pencil and paper? I tore several pages out of my notebook and handed them to him with a pencil. Just a short note, which I'd like to have sent to my son, he declared. I'll put down the address. I handed him the notebook to use as a pad. He laid the notebook on the bed and leaned over to write from a standing position. For several minutes, the silence was broken only by the sound of pencil running over the paper. I looked down in fascination at his smooth-skinned hands with their long, slender, aristocratic fingers. With hands like those, I thought, it's easy to get along. There's no need to bow, smile, talk, pay compliments, or bring flowers. A pair of such hands do the whole job. Rodin would have liked to sculpt them. The thought of Rodin made me think of Stefan, a German I had known at Buchenwald. He had been a sculptor before the war, and when I met him, the Nazis had cut off his right hand. In Berlin, during the first years after Hitler came to power, Stefan and some of his friends organized an embryonic resistance group, which the Gestapo uncovered shortly after its founding. Stefan was arrested, questioned, and subjected to torture. Give us names, they told him, and we'll set you free. They beat and starved him, but he would not talk. Day after day and night after night, they prevented him from sleeping, but still he did not give in. Finally, he was haled before the Berlin chief of the Gestapo, a timid, mild man who was, in a soft-spoken, fatherly manner, advised him to stop being foolishly stubborn. The sculptor heard him out in stony silence. Come on, said the chief. Just give us one name as a sign of goodwill. Still, Stefan would not speak. Too bad, said the chief. You're obliging me to hurt you. At a sign from the chief, 2 SS men led the prisoner into what looked like an operating room, with a dentist's chair installed near the window. Beside it, on a table with a white oilcloth cover, was an orderly array of surgical instruments. They shut the window, tied Stefan onto the chair, and lit cigarettes. The mild-mannered chief came into the room wearing a white doctor's jacket. Don't be afraid, he said. I used to be a surgeon.